fact that it's a long event and people are out of town. So it was a mistake on my part when I scheduled the talk. I didn't realise that it was going to be a public holiday. But there you go, all you guys showed up, which is really great, because it's good to feel supported, or good to see that people have an interest in what artists actually have to say about their work. Because artists often work alone, and they really rarely have the opportunity to get direct feedback on their work. And that's a really limiting thing on an artist. Artists don't live in isolation, or they shouldn't live in isolation. They should be getting their work out there. The purpose of working and producing work is to express ideas, and to have those ideas interrogated by others, appreciated by others, criticised by others, and that's how the discussion happens. That's how cultural discussion happens, and that's how culture is actually transmitted through that interaction between audience and artists. So thank you again for coming and for being my interrogators. Okay. That's right. Okay, so where do I start? I'll start at the beginning. I'll give you a brief background about myself, for those of you who don't know me, and I'll try to put the exhibition in context. Often when you enter an exhibition, it's very difficult to truly understand what you're looking at and therefore appreciate what's on the walls or on the floor if you're looking at a sculpture, if you don't have some kind of insight into the motivations behind the show and how the work came to be in the first place. An artwork is not a thing that exists alone. It's like the tip of an iceberg. Yeah, you see the artwork on the wall, and when you really think about it, it is like an iceberg because it's the tip of a huge amount of experience which has occurred in the artist's life before. It's only what the artist is willing to show the public. But there's lots of stuff that maybe we'll try to unpack throughout this. If you ask the right questions, I'll be able to answer them. That sits behind each piece of work, or the motivation behind the artist, and even the artist's career in general. There's a whole lot of stuff that the audience doesn't see. And that's partly to do with the artist's sense of privacy, but it's also the way artists tend to generate their ideas. A lot of the ideas are generated in private, in their head first, and then they're expressed externally in the form of a painting or a drawing or a sculpture or whatever the artist is making. Okay, so a bit of background. My family migrated to Australia back in 1968. When we came from Italy, from southern Italy, from Sicily, we had a chest, one chest of, on boulder, to say in Italian, and in that chest there were some clothing, the necessities of life, books and paintings. That's all there was. And I remember that was the big green one that we had at home with the brass handles at the end, and full of my dad's paintings and my dad's books. And that was going to be...
I'm going to have to correct you, you were very young at the time.
Yeah.
It was one trunk, but 7 large boxes. And these boxes contain the paintings and the books.
That's right, yeah.
The trunk contained mainly clothing for the full family, that's 6 of us, plus a few bits of memorabilia from home, basically.
Yeah, but basically that was like the foundation.
Paintings were part of the cultural baggage, literally part of the pun, that we brought to Australia.
Yeah.
Obviously you had to carry them, so you remember.
The bugs had that 1 week back wheel.
I remember going to Port Melbourne station here to identify them in this huge magazine of cases.
Yeah.
But anyways.
Yeah, so anyway, so we came with that sort of stuff, and that forever we were, you say, encumbered by the arts in a way. Yeah, it was something that we couldn't avoid as kids. And along with the sculpture, the books and some sculptures and the paintings, of course, my dad's paintings, because my father was the first person who taught me, was my first teacher. And he taught me, it wasn't he didn't teach me by lesson, he taught me by experience. So I'd see him paint and I would copy him. I'd like to think I was trying to copy him, or I'd paint with him, or I'd just watch him, or I'd just sit with him and do this. And oftentimes in the background, there was music. And music and the memory of my father painting is always accompanied by music. There is not a moment where I can't think of Dad painting without music playing. And some of the pieces of music in particular are reflected in this show, not all of them. The painting behind me in particular, Capriccio, which came from a composition by Rimsky-Korsakov called Capriccio Español, right, or Spanish Capriccio, okay, is the painting behind me. And that was that experience with the music was fundamental in the formation of me as an artist. Really, I can't think of a time when music wasn't at play in some way. And that stayed with me all the way through my education, my formal education, then my time at university, studying fine arts. There was still this thing with music. And I've always wondered about music because I've always thought, what is this thing? What is music? You know, in the painting game, or in the fine arts game, there's, academics like to split up fine artists into figurative artists and abstract artists. You know, those who paint realistically and those who paint, abstractly. But that doesn't really exist in music. There's no such thing as an abstract piece of music or a figurative piece of music. How is that so? And that's always been a question that I've had. Why is it that people have a preference for realistic painting or abstract painting, and yet they don't apply the same type of judgment to the music that they listen to? What is it about music in particular that sort of avoids that? Now, if you've read my artist statement, I mentioned that music transcends culture, it transcends time. You can listen to a Beethoven symphony in Europe, and you can listen to the same piece of music in China, and you'll get the same type of appreciation for it. Maybe the cultural understanding will be different, but the music will still find its way to the heart, no matter which culture someone's from. And I think for that reason, music is probably the most complete art form. Unfortunately, I'm not a musician. I don't claim to be a musician. I know a little bit about music because of my interest in it, etc. But that's what really interests me in terms of painting. Now, unfortunately, I'm limited as a painter because I only have visual means to express an idea, not this other magical thing which music does. When I was very young, I remember my father had a record collection, a very extensive record collection, and I remember my very first memories was of my dad's box set of Beethoven 1 symphonies, right? And it was an Ace of Diamonds set, Decca. I don't know if you remember the old Decca recordings, and it was sort of 9 albums, large albums, and on the cover of each one, and it's very early memories. I would have been 5, 6, who knows how young I was, but they were very, very early memories. On the cover of these things, there were copies of Rubens paintings. There were Rubens, close-up Rubens, large, Baroque paintings. You see these figures, and that stuck with me. That really did. That was a great art lesson in and of itself. Because immediately I associated a visual image with the sound that was coming out of the record. And so it never really left me. So the exhibition you see around you is a connection between those two extremes, or those two different elements, the music and the visual art. Okay, so fast forward, I go to college, I study painting. Ted May was one of my tutors, which I'm greatly honoured to have here today. Good old Ted. But there was a good experience. Overall, there was a lot of negative things there that happened as well. Because I think that university's got a lot to answer for in some respects with the way arts education is headed. But overall, that was my development. That was my growth into the arts. I became a teacher for many years. I still kept the painting practice, but it got to the point where internal tensions were such that I found an outlet in the gallery. Eventually, the gallery came into being, and this whole venture started for me. But it was a long road to get here. The work on show. Well, as I state in my statement, opus is a musical term. It just means, just a term in musical jargon which means work. And really, a work or work is really what art is about. When I set up an exhibition, when I think of an exhibition, I don't think of an exhibition as a collection of paintings. I think of them as a whole experience. I like to think that an exhibition is designed in a way, and paintings are created to serve the exhibition. And then if they stand out at all individually, then that's a byproduct of the experience of the exhibition, because the exhibition is for an audience. And the audience is you guys and anybody else that comes in off the street, or someone who wants to buy a painting. They're the audience. And so, through those limited means of painting, and through my interest in music, these paintings came to be. What else can I say? The conception of the paintings themselves. If you look at the paintings, they've all got a certain look to them, don't they? They all have a certain characteristic. There's figures in many of them, female figures, generally, because I find the female form a lot more lyrical and musical. It's a purely aesthetic decision in this instance. But the figures are there to centre the composition, to give the eye something to hang on, because the eye, I believe, likes to look for things that it can recognise. And the human silhouette is one of those things that we're genetically predisposed to recognise. And so, not being an abstract artist, and these aren't abstract works, they are abstractions, yeah? They're abstracted from experience and from the visual world, but they're not abstract work in themselves, because they're basically founded on my visual experience and my emotional response to that experience. Does that sort of make sense to people? Yeah? So the figure is used as a device to divide the canvas, to give the central composition to the canvas. But then there's also these overlaying rectangular divisions. And you'll see that in some of the paintings, you'll sort of see this sort of thing happening. You've got divisions like this. Now, there's sort of a progression from my previous exhibition. In my previous exhibition, which I did in 2021, I think it was, I was actually exploring perception and time, and how we perceive time in terms of overlapping moments, so to speak. So I came up with this sort of shorthand to describe a segment of experience, which was signified by this division. Well, soon after that particular show, I was actually looking through a Beethoven score online. It was interesting, I just came across it on YouTube. There's a thing called, you should have a look at it, animated music, I think it's called, animated symphonies. Fantastic stuff, right? There's a series of animations which translate music into this sort of animation, which is like it's purely abstract animation. And I was looking at it and I said, gee, that's the way we perceive the world is actually directly correlates with the way that we experience music, or music is composed. And I thought about, how does a composer create this sort of music? Now, I said earlier, I'm not a musician, so I'm just sort of standing in the dark. If any musicians there in the crowd in front of me, you can correct me. But I looked at the score and I realised that when you look at a musical score, what do you have? You've got different parts composed for different instruments, right? All separately. So some are melodic lines, some are rhythmic lines, yeah? Some are just background lines that fit in between. And all of these different elements are then sandwiched into a piece. Does that make sense? So imagine that if you're looking at a score of the Ninth Symphony, you've got the choir, you've got the first violin, the second violin, the timpani, the brass, the woodwind, and they're all written down separately, which means that Beethoven would have had to think about, well, he had this great musical idea, which he probably started off as a melodic line, and then he had to split it up, orchestrate it into different instruments. And he had to write that down. And then he had to, the musicians take that and compress it again into the performance, with each person playing their part in line with everyone else. And so you have, the whole musical experience is like a huge sandwich, okay, and that we hear. We hear the violins playing here, the timpani play here, the brass, the woodwind, and the conductor gets them all to work in coordination with each other, and we hear one sound. And that's essentially what I tried to do with these particular paintings. Right? So I mentioned earlier that, for instance, this painting here is inspired by a particular piece of music. I would use the piece of music, being a painter, as a starting point for the work. These are not descriptions of the painting, in so much as they're born of the piece of music. So the music is the seed, and then the plant is the painting, or the flower is the painting. So I let the painting evolve. Once I'd started it, once I investigated that piece of music, and I sat there and I listened to the music, and I sort of tried to break it down, and I tried to code it for myself. So some layers are purely melodic lines. Some layers represent rhythm. Some colours represent rhythm. Yeah? And then I do that for each piece of music, and then I put them together in the experience of actually painting them and composing the picture. And at the end, what you get is what you've got here. You've got layers, and they are very layered paintings. They're not like they're not conceived of being one thing next to another, or one shape interlocking with another. I conceive of them as one painting covered by another painting, covered by another painting, and then I edit out what I don't want and I just leave what's back behind. Yeah. So the painting itself is organically grows from that initial structure that I put there, and a lot of that happens in the editing process. So you can imagine if I were to translate, say, all the melodic line in the music and put everything on the page, and all the rhythmic sort of component of the music and put that on the page, it would be incomprehensible. So I have to select and I have to edit. So at that point, I make an aesthetic judgment. And this is where the painting comes in. The painting comes into its own. It's the editing of that particular piece that then creates the work. Yeah? And that's the foundation of the current exhibition. So if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask them. Yeah? But essentially, that's how all the paintings were born. Now, if you look through the catalogue, there are some paintings that are conceived together. And you'll see that if you look around the room, you'll see which ones were probably created at approximately the same time. Some that were conceived as a set because they belong to a body of music by a particular composer that I think are related to each other. And for instance, these small ones, they're all Chopin nocturnes. So this one and those small ones, they're Chopin nocturnes that are then translated into music and they're kept as a set because Chopin usually, in this certain period of his life, composed a series of nocturnes in series almost. They're actually numbered like that. So if you look at the catalogue, they're numbered, nocturne number 9, number 32, whatever, and they're catalogued that way. So I tried to give an insight into the catalogue as well to help lead the audience through what I'm trying to communicate. Of course, even if you don't know the composers and you don't read the statement, hopefully you'll be able to look at the paintings, that's my hope, and you'll be able to appreciate them for what they are. So they exist on different levels. Artworks exist on different levels of appreciation, depending on what the audience brings to it and what the artist has infused the work with, either intentionally or unintentionally. And so at the end of the day, you have an exhibition. That's how the exhibition comes about. So that's about it really for the show. Yes?
Have you tried listening to John Cage and discordant music? And
I have listened to John Cage, yes.
Yeah, and what reaction would you have listening to his work?
What do you mean? How do you mean what reaction?
Well, you're talking about non-abstract music and melody and the like, and there's often discordant sort of phases within his music.
There's always discordant stuff, even in Beethoven.
Right.
You look at Stravinsky, like early 20th century composer. Schoenberg, atonal music. Respighi, he wrote a series of what are called tone poems. Now, tone poems are interesting, yeah, because they're symphonic works, and they have a story, they have a narrative behind them usually, but they don't necessarily follow a melodic line, although they do include melody. And so you're basically having the breaking down of musical form. The melodic line gets broken, etc. And you have so hence this figure here, this painting here, is actually probably one of the more abstract paintings in the show. But there again, I still include the figure. There are figures in there. There's figures in everything. They just get edited out in the process depending on the music. That's simply because of my need to have something centered. I've always had this need. I don't know why, but it's a primal thing. Maybe if you ask Jung why I do it, I include this primal figure in there, but I always have to edit it out because of the time. That just occurs in the painting process. But see, something like that, it's discordant in a way, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I tried not to be too literal in my representation of these things. And the figure sometimes is only partly accentuated, in some more than others. In some there are more than one figure that are hidden within the composition. So this painting here, this is based on Beethoven's 6th Symphony. It's partial symphony. There's 4 figures in this painting. Now, if you look at it long enough, you'll begin to, sort of see where they would be. One's pretty obvious, but the others aren't. And then eventually, if you look at it long enough, they hopefully they'll reveal themselves to you in the composition. And if they don't, that's all well and good too, because you've got the rest of the painting to appreciate in the process. So the figure is not the subject of the painting, it's rather a device for me to centre my thinking, but also to hang the composition around. Does that make sense? Yeah? So it's not like the painting is simply about the figure. And they're not really descriptions of music. They're rather what's born of my interpretation of the structure of the piece that I'm interested in. Yeah, so that's...
Which of these works best for you?
Works best for me. I don't know, that's a pretty difficult question to ask because I'm
totally...
totally...
You asked me.
Yeah, I know. That's right. It is too. Yeah. I think the one behind the desk, the big one behind the desk. Why? Because I think there's a good balance between the figure and the painting. You know what I mean? Some are more figurative orientated. You think it's picture is a thing, but look at the one behind the desk. There's figures there, and so. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's why I chose it. You see, so you can see it. I think that's for me. That's yes, Joe.
I'd just like to make a comment.
Yeah.
Bravo on your exhibition, it's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
I wanted to say to you that I'm not sure if you played this, as far as a record or a tape or a CD, but you must have had them on repeat.
Spotify.
Spotify.
Thanks to my wonderful wife who got me Spotify to listen to.
You must have had them on repeat for a long time because the work involved in these paintings is extraordinary. So, bravo.
Oh, thank you.
Fantastic.
The work, as I said,
there are thousands of hours here, I can see.
there's lots of hours. I started the exhibition in April last year. I think it was about the 20th of April. 20th or 21st of April. And that's when I got my canvas order. I think I got you the canvases, remember? But then it was April, wasn't it? Yeah. It was April, and I finished, the last painting that was finished was this little one. And I finished that, would have been in late January. That was the last painting I finished. The first painting I did in the show was sort of a continuation from what I did from my last show, and that was the yellow one over there. That was the first painting of this new series, and I don't think of exhibitions as being standalone things. I think of it in groups of 3. So I'm already planning the last triptych to the exhibition cycle that I've got, and that will happen in a year's time. So it'll be an extension of what I've learned here. So this was an extension of Future Memories, which was my earlier exhibition, and I'm going to develop something along these lines. I'm not sure quite what it is. I'm in the process of planning that now, which will take me into next March, and that means I'll start that formally. I'll be starting the painting for that probably. Well, I've started one painting already, but I'll sort of get my groove, I think, in about a month or so, and then I'll be off in that direction when I order many bunches of canvas. So that's just the way it goes. But I think of it I don't think of the exhibition as one solo, isolated experience. I think of it in a series because my life is a series of events. And so it's something that's going to be the centre of my life for the foreseeable future in terms of my work practice. And so I have to have that in mind. I have to have some kind of strategy to deal with it, to deal with the ideas. Because I like working with ideas, but I don't want the works to be just purely conceptual. It's one thing I detest is conceptual art. I hate conceptual art. I really hate any conceptual artist. I'm sorry, but I hate working with what I've seen. Right? I just don't like it. Right? Because it's just all about ideas. And the idea is not the only thing. It's important, but it's not the thing that a work of art should be based on. A work of art should be a tangible object that can be looked at, conceived, criticised, picked up, thrown out the window, hung on the wall, or placed on a mantelpiece. Yeah, that's what consists of a work of art for me. Purely conceptual work, where there's a great, huge essay behind the piece of work, and the work itself is fairly minimal. Then that has no, in my mind, that doesn't have the place in my creative experience. Yes.
Can you give examples of conceptual art?
Conceptual art is like. Imagine a found object. A bicycle wheel. That's different. I'll talk about the bicycle wheel in a moment. But the shop, yeah. Well, it's, for instance, an artist finds an object, any object, and puts it on a pedestal and says, "That's now an artwork because I say it is." And then they write a huge essay justifying the fact that it's an artwork. And it might be an interesting idea, and it might be a very interesting idea to deal with. I'm not poo-pooing the idea. I'm poo-pooing the expression of that idea. Right? Like, for instance, there was an artist very recently, over the last few years, who got a banana and he taped it to a wall. He made 3 bananas. He had 2 in storage. He put one on the wall at this really major American gallery. And on opening night, it was all conceptual, that sort of, you know, that sort of thing. Everybody was snoozing around with their champagne and stuff. He walks over the barrier, there's a barrier around it, and he picks a banana off the walls and he eats it. Now that banana was worth 150,000. Right? He eats the banana, and all the media's there, all taking photographs of him eating the artwork, and automatically those 2 other bananas went up in value because there was one less. So they automatically overnight, and they sold it. They sold the banana. They sold the bananas to people. And the people who bought them, they got a certificate saying you bought the banana from so and so. And they took a photo of the experience, and part of the whole experience is you're buying the idea. They filmed it. The buyer doesn't get the banana, he gets the banana, but he gets the film of him eating it, and all the documentation that goes with it, and that's the experience. That's marketing. That's fun. It's funny. It's an act of stupidity on the part of the buyer, but it's also an act of like bravura on the part of the inverted commas of the artist who goes out there and puts the idea out there ahead of the object. Okay, so that sort of thing is more like social commentary, which is fine in of itself, but for me it doesn't constitute that purely conceptual thing. It just doesn't do it for me personally. All right? Yes.
Having seen your last exhibition and seeing some of your work with the exhibition prior, which was more figurative, lyrical figures, almost pre-Raphaelite figures, like listen for me. This, where you're going, seems to be a radical departure from that. I want to know what was the catalyst that made you shift quite radically, I think.
Just think life. life and circumstance. Part of it was based on practicalities. Because of those other paintings, which were, they're quite detailed, and because I over time, I trained myself very academically, if you want to use that term, right? In a very academic manner. Those paintings take a long time to generate, very long time. And they're very process orientated. Very hard for me to put an exhibition of this type with that type of work all at once. We would have to wait a much longer period. That was one reason, turning out of the work. Now I still do that type of work for individuals, people on commission, or for myself, and I believe strongly in keeping that practice up, because that's what gives me and justifies me in painting like this later on. It gives me the freedom to do this. You know what I mean? Right? Sometimes you've got to constrict yourself a bit in order to free yourself. And that's if I hope that answers your question. But but I'm always changing. People always change. And I had a need to do this. I really had a need. I really had a need to break out of that rigid structure that I put myself in, and venture into this type of thing. Yes?
In relation to the question, as you explained right from the very beginning, that you actually, with layouts from an exhibition like that, you already predetermined basically what that's going to, what you want to get across. So do you still find your freedom in that?
Yes. I think that putting limitations on yourself, or working within limits, but they're not limitations on yourself, but working within set limits frees you. For instance, I work in reverse to many other artists. I get to speak to a lot of artists in my capacity as a gallery director here, and I have the impression, and this is not wrong, it's not a criticism of them, because artists work in different ways, and whatever way works for them is absolutely justified. Mine is just my way that works for me, right? So I'll preface that, what I'm about to say with that. But some artists paint a series of pictures over time, then time to exhibit, the opportunity to exhibit comes, and they'll select the best ones, or they'll give a help in selecting the best ones, and then they pick them up. Fine, that's a perfectly good way to work and conceive of an exhibition. Yeah? It's very laborious in the sense that you have to do 20 paintings to turn out to pick out 5. Do you know what I mean? Like your success to rejection rate is a lot higher. And that's sort of working in a way, it's really good because it's very open and it's very free because you're exploring each painting for itself. But there are also limitations on that, I think. I think there are limitations into how artists can provide an experience. So I think of the exhibition as a piece of theatre. You know what I mean? Like, it's not just a collection of pictures. For me, an exhibition isn't just a collection of pictures. It's a series of images or artworks, whatever they are, that tell a story. about the artist and about the idea that underpins it. Most exhibitions, I wouldn't say all of them, but most exhibitions tend to be themed in one way or other, and that theme is defined by the title that the artist gives the show. It's not new. I mean, Opus is an example. Yeah. So you have this the whole concept of putting together a show as like I'm putting on a play. In other words, we're actors. And depending which one you're standing in front, that's the one that's talking to you at that particular moment. But you only see that painting in context of the painting next door or the one across the room. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? That's why, I don't know if I'm not making myself clear, but that's the idea between that. I start the other way around. I don't start with a series of pictures that I select. I start, for instance, for this next show, I'm conceiving of my theme, I'll write my statement, I'll design my catalogue. Detail, as detailed as I can get it, and then I start painting to the catalogue. And then that'll change, of course, during the painting process, because painting is not, nothing ever turns out the way you plan it. And then if something comes up, I'll change it. Because I wrote the catalogue in the first place, so I can change it. But at least I know which direction I'm going in. So that, I need that, personally I need that structure. That's just me. Other artists would see that as a prison, because then they have to stick to something that you're not. But I believe that once you're in, you're committed, fully committed, and you go through with the idea. If the idea was good enough to start with, and to write a statement on, well then you're committed to push through. Or else, don't start in the first place.
Do you find that very conceptual?
Maybe it is. No, you're right. You're right, it is. You know what? No, absolutely. That's a really good point.
That's marvellous.
I love that.
Sorry.
That's really good. And it is. It is. I don't poo-poo ideas. I poo-poo the application of the idea. So, in a sense, this experience. You know, this is an art experience. What do you call it? A happening. What they used to call it in the 60s, a happening. But this is an exhibition is an art experience, and it has to be. Or else, what's the point of having an exhibition? You know, if people want to just walk in and look at pictures on the wall, they walk into a shop, not a gallery. You go to a framer's and you see a nice picture frame, and you. But for me, you have to think of the exhibition as a whole in order to satisfy my need, you know, to see it up. Now, as I said, it's not the only way. Many artists will exhibit, have a totally different philosophy behind how they show their work and how they select their work. Some will do it based on their own particular tastes, whether the paintings sit well together or any other reason. And some artists make the link afterwards. They'll take the pictures and they'll say, okay, I'll make the title of the show this to suit the pictures. Whereas I don't. I think I start with a theme, and then I try to explore the theme as much as I can. And I do my research. I do quite a bit of reading, and I listen to a lot of music, and I try to understand what I'm actually trying to explore. Because it's really, art for me is a tool to understand life. That's my tool. I'm not very good at other things. Probably not very good at painting, but you know, I'm not very good at other things. But painting I find a particular attraction to, and I love to do it. So I use that as my means to explore things. And hopefully I can make that understood to other people, to maybe communicate something through the process. So that's a great question. Thank you for that question. It's fantastic. No, it is. It's really good. It's a really good question.
But it is very conceptual the way you're approaching, yeah.
It is. But I'm not saying artists should be conceptual, but they should make things. Not just have the ideas written on a piece of paper. Yeah. Yes.
Elio, I've appreciated Giacometti for a long time, but never quite understood his work until I read a little book about a person having a portrait painted by Giacometti.
Yeah.
What he said with Giacometti, he talked about the impossibility of really capturing a portrait.
Yeah.
And the doubt. So every mark or gesture or overlay is a process of doubt.
Yeah.
He would characterise it as that. Now, in your process, I guess from an artist's point of view, I'm challenging myself and wanting to know how do you overcome the doubt that comes into the process as you work?
The doubt is partly removed from the fact that I have a catalogue that I'm working to.
Right.
That's what I'm saying. It allows me to be free.
Yeah.
Because the reason why I write my statement and I create my catalogue first is to satisfy my own insecurities. Because I'm full of insecurities as an artist. Full of them. So I have to somehow allay these insecurities and say, give myself a reason to do it. And to clarify what I want to do. So when I finally touch the canvas, I know where I'm going with it. I get a sense that I know where I'm going with it and I'm confident with it. It's just my insecurity. Alright, that's all that is. Yeah? So there's, it's just, I hope that answers in part what you're saying. But then,
Elio, I understand that your idea about creating an event, creating a whole total physical event that actually correlates and makes people feel or think as they're walking through the space. And I can't help wondering how you go about choosing aspects of your presentation. For example, framing. We have with us, some of you may have noticed, that's a very, very famous framer in Melbourne. Probably one of the most distinguished framers, work for national galleries and museums. So framing is an important aspect of your work, and having discussed framing with you, and I understand that you know that framing, that you do agree with me that framing completes the work. What makes you choose that particular style of framing? How does the framing have to do with the painting? Or does the framing just reflect something about the space? Or how do you see the framing component of your presentation?
Okay, first of all, I'd say that it's not always necessary to frame a picture. Not always necessary, provided the intent is to create an unframed picture. But if the artist doesn't frame because they can't be bothered, that's another story. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say, so I'll preface what I'm going to say. So, these frames were chosen for this particular set of works. Why? Because they're shadow frames and they're very simple. And they sort of reflect, what's going on in the picture itself, like visually, aesthetically. Does that make sense? Now, you can imagine them without the frame, they'll still work. But I think the frame finishes it off. And in my mind, the frame actually helps you contextualise the work. It's a thing on the wall. I've still got this thing, this traditional view of paintings, almost as being a window into another world. And so this becomes another window, and that becomes the other world. You know, I sort of limit it there. Now, some artists don't want the frame for the same reason. The object is, they see the painting as an object, and the drips on the side as existing in their own right, and they're all part of the work, and that's fine. If the intent is really that. But many times we have artists who present works and they don't want to frame them because it costs too much, or you know, a number of other reasons. You know, they can't be bothered, or whatever reason. I believe the frame, I personally, in my own work, I believe the frames are necessary for me, psychologically, to say that's the closure of that painting. I only frame it after I finish it. I'll sign my paintings halfway through the process, but I'll frame them at the end. Does that make sense? Right. So, and that's another thing, signing a work. I believe that painters have to, this is my personal belief, I can understand why painters, there's a trend these days, painters don't sign their work. They say it interrupts the aesthetic. Like your signature is the aesthetic. It's part of your aesthetic, you made it, you're the artist. Integrate it. You know, I believe that the work, the paintings have to connect with the person who made it. That's the mark of the artist. And so I've got signatures that some of which are obvious, some of which are hidden in the painting. That's my belief. Other artists don't see it that way. They don't sign the back or the side, or they don't sign it at all sometimes. But invariably with my gallery hat on, if somebody comes in and wants to buy a painting, they say, is it signed? Is it signed? Where's it signed? Where? They want to know. I had somebody buy a painting, two paintings, small paintings off me at the last show, and she went away, and she came back 2 weeks later and she said, oh, look, I'm sorry, I said, you're going to return the paintings. I was mortified. She said, no, you forgot to sign them. And I said, but I had signed them, just the signatures were hidden. Were like green on green background, you know, so. And I pointed them out to her, and she was totally satisfied. I said, do you want me to sign over the top? And no, as long as I know they're signed. So the signature's got a different purpose. You know, people want to see that sometimes. Not everyone, but for some people it's important. So I sign it. You know, so framing is an important thing. Framing is important. Signing is, I think, is important too, because why wouldn't I sign it? I made it. I stand by the work that I do. If people don't like it, well, I'm sorry they don't like it. I thought it was good enough to put up, and they've got to live with it. So do I. And then if it doesn't get sold, it goes in storage, and if it's maybe down the road someone will buy it. If not, I paint over it. You know what I mean? Like it's got its own life.
So DNA is coming into artist signature now because there's DNA all over that canvas. So,
Yes.
like Pro Heart, for example,
Yes.
uses DNA now. So the signature cannot be.
True, it's true, but it's still like, there's not a digital thing now. Some people are embedding digital chips in their paintings. For me, as far as I'm concerned, that's gimmick. If you give me something with a little squiggle with a piece of some paint on the end of a brush, why go through the trouble of putting a digital chip on it, or chipping your animal or something? I don't know. It's absurd. But anyway, that's fine too. People want the provenance and they want to keep. I suppose it's good for record keeping because you can just scan it and all that sort of stuff. But I'm not concerned with that. I'm not concerned with that aspect of it. I'm concerned with the integrity of the work in itself because I think it's important. Signing something and framing it, for me, again, other artists have different ideas, and as long as they have a reason for it, it's perfectly good too. But they've got to have a reason for it. Otherwise, it's just lazy. I had an artist that exhibits here, and I asked her to go bigger. But she does this beautiful painting, lovely painting. And she said to me, but it won't fit in my car. So, in other words, she's limiting her painting practice to the size of her car. Now, how great is that idea if you have to limit the size of your boot? I mean, what's it going to cost you? $50 to bring it over here. But that thinking has to go because, or else you don't give yourself the full freedom to work your idea to whatever size you want to work it. And really, that's what it should be about. If you're an artist and you have ideas, then it's your job to get them out there. They have to be 10 feet tall, or you make it so it's 10 feet tall, or else don't do it. Don't compromise your idea by making it this big, because it won't be the same idea. It'll be something else. Yeah? So that's what I meant before. If you commit yourself to something, you do it the best you can. Otherwise don't do it, because it's just wasting your time and wasting your life, really, as a painter. Any question?
I don't know.
Yeah. Sorry. You want it?
Me?
Yeah.
What happens if you're in a attempt to painting and it's just not, you just don't feel it, it's not working, do you abandon it? Do you put it aside and come back to it later? How do you make that call when it's just not working?
Sometimes you just got to walk away and just give it time. It could be that you're tired, not the painting's bad, but you're tired, you're bad. At that moment, you can't see it because you had a hard day, or you're tired, or you had too much to drink, or whatever. And you're not thinking straight, so you're not looking at it with the right eyes. And so sometimes you have to walk away and put it away, and maybe have a second. Sometimes I've got two canvases going at once. So, and then you just put it away and you meditate on it. Sometimes you get other people to look at it. You look at it and say something, and you say, I didn't see that. And then you come back to it, you save it. Sometimes, if it's really bad, you start again.
Just paint over it.
Paint over. Just get a big brush and just knock it out. Just knock it out and start. Better to knock it out rather than to try to save something. It's a lost cause. But sometimes it's you and sometimes it's the painting. So you've got to be clear enough to distinguish which is a fault, if you use that word, or which is defective. You know what I mean? Yeah. You have a question?
It's partly answered because thank you for being so honest and privilege it's give us this talk and then on Wednesday when we talk. And you're partly your inspiration in that sense. Your conception of the whole exhibition, right? Now, being at the other end from that start to that, how much has your original ideas and the process you deviated from that original conception?
From this?
Yeah, in the show, because this is fresh.
So I get the question again. How much have I deviated from my original starting point?
Oh, okay. Statements and stuff.
I had a very general idea of what the exhibition was going to look like, but it's fuzzy. You know what I mean? As you create the work, I start to place the work. Like I knew where the works were going to go. More or less, I had an idea where the walls were going to be placed. We can move these walls around, and I had that idea. So, but as the exhibition came to fruition, and as more and more of my paintings came back from the framers, I'd reconsider that. You know what I mean? I'd sort of reflect on what I thought, and so the change wasn't that much. There's been some changes, but not as much as you'd think, because everything was made with a purpose. You know what I mean? And I usually, to produce this exhibition, I produce this many paintings plus another 3 or 4. that I didn't frame, that I installed. So that becomes then the seed of the next show. Does that make sense? That becomes, it starts me off on that next journey for the next exhibition. So it's all intertwined. I don't like to have things that come to an end. You know, my last exhibition in a sense lives in this exhibition as well. This is a flow on of the last show. And hopefully the next show will have some of this in it, but maybe hopefully it would have taken it. You will see something new in that next exhibition that you haven't seen in this one. Or maybe a consolidation of some of this stuff. I don't know yet, because I haven't made the work, right? But hopefully that's what I tend to see. So I like to think of things in three, and then after those three are finished, and I feel that I've examined this way of working, I'll reconsider whether I want to go back to that more realistic style or whether I want to continue and go totally abstract. I don't know. It doesn't matter for me because it's all painting and it's all exploring an idea. So, look, I have been blessed in a way because I'm very versatile. I can paint very realistically and very academically. I can paint more abstractly. I don't consider myself to be an abstract painter. That's one thing, like I said, there might be one or two paintings that fit that description here, but even so, I consider them to be figurative paintings. You know what I mean? So I've got, you know, I'm very, very flexible in how I do it, so I can change. It's whether I want to change and whether I find it appropriate to change at that time. Whether the idea is big enough to justify the change. Because the idea is then going to drive the next show. You know what I mean? Yeah.
What is your advice for people who want to paint or hold exhibitions or who are beginners, new artists?
What is your
advice?
Okay, so beginners and things is to listen to Beethoven and read a lot. Not to paint, right? Because in order to paint, I think there's got to be something there to paint. Now, there are two things that artists paint: what's out there or what's in here. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, if you're one of those artists who just paints what's out there, it's fantastic, it's great too. You can produce some fantastic work, but it's limited to that. And sometimes that can, not always, but it can fall into illustration.
Yeah.
You understand? Like the need to be overly descriptive or to focus on technique more than content, let's say. If you're the other way, and you totally paint from the inside, well then, it might be too personal. It might be something that people can't access. So you have to find another language for that. You have to develop a language. Now, in order to do that, what do you need? You need to have food to feed off. And like musical and literary, for me, experience is important. Because I'm part of a culture. I'm part of, whether I like it or not, I'm part of Western culture, and I'm part of a culture which has got a long artistic and musical tradition, which it's my duty almost to know it as best I can. I don't have to like it, but I have to know it. So I have to take it in, and I have to somehow integrate that in my work.
When you say read a lot, are you talking about artistry, or what are you like read? Because reading is so wide.
Yeah, wide. Well, read whatever you're interested in, but I would suggest like having some kind of center to your reading. Like understand what. First of all, identify what you like and what you don't like, and then make a decision if what you like is really what you should be reading about in order to improve your painting. So for me personal, totally personal choice, I'm not making a judgment about what anybody else reads. I made it my business years ago to read all the seminal works in Western literature.
Say that again.
I made a decision to read all the important, what is considered to be all the important works in Western literature. And then once I got to know them, I tried to delve into the Eastern stuff a little bit. Yeah? So that was my preference, because I thought I need to be in contact. People talk about Dostoevsky. I need to know what he wrote. I need to know what his ideas were. Yeah, I need to know about music. I have to know Mozart, Beethoven, Bach, Puccini. I have to know these things. I have to. How can I be part of this tradition if I don't know it? I want to be part of that tradition. And in a sense, I haven't got a choice. None of us have got a choice in the tradition we're born in. We're sort of born with it in a way. Now you can choose to neglect it, in which case you're throwing away money. You know, it's cultural money. You're throwing it away. You know, there's people that are greater people than than I am work before me? Why wouldn't I use what they did to try to elevate myself? It's very egocentric, but yes, I try to stand on their shoulders, even though their shoulders are far too high for me to reach. I want to get there, but I can't. Right? But that's the idea. The idea is you're grasping for something else, for an ideal or something better than you all the time. And they've already been there. Why can't I be there? You know, I can look at de Kooning, I can look at Rothko, I can look at all the abstract expressionists. They're part of Western culture now. In their time, they weren't. They were like these rebels. But now they're fixed as, you know, these icons of Western painting now. And so I look at them too. You know, I have to know them, even if I don't like them. I have to know about them, and I have to try to understand what they were trying to do. So then there might be things in it that I can incorporate in my work. Like one of the great revelations for me was, you know, I'd always been interested in American painting to a certain extent because it's such a big part of, you know, 20th century painting. But de Kooning, William de Kooning, and then look at Ashil Gorky, you know, all that group, that abstract expressionist group. They were a big deal for me to rediscover those and re-look at them when I started to do some of these, you know, and now I look at some of the surrealist paintings, the earlier surrealist paintings, and all those things they get absorbed, and then I take what I think I need to take in order to create my paintings. Does that make sense? So that's what I try to do anyway. But I think a lot of artists do that anyway. They just do it unconsciously, or they're embedded so much in their craft and they know so much about it, they just absorb and they express what they like. Okay? So, yeah. Any other questions?
If you, last final question. Before we had a question about what advice would you give an artist. Would your advice to a student be different?
No.
And what about to a professional artist?
It's not for me to advise a professional artist anything. It's not my role to advise professional artists because they're professional artists and they've got their own road and they've got their own direction. I may or may not, my thinking may or may not be in line with the other artists, but that's their road. If they want to walk it, they're free to. They made that decision and they had the courage to take it. It might be much more fruitful than my road. So who am I to take them off their road? You know, I mean, we just know so much. We don't know everything. We can't know everything. So other people, we've got to give other people the benefit of having their experience and their road, their way to do it. And the thing I said earlier about conceptual art, I really do mean it. I hate it. Right? But that's my preference. That's a road I will not take. But that doesn't mean someone else can't take it and maybe make use of it somehow. I just refuse to get involved in it. All that feeds is academics. And God knows I don't really like academics that much in terms of, but you know, in terms of the fact that they tend to, because being academics, they tend to preference things that they like to write about. Understand what I mean by that? They tend to just preference things that they can make an industry out of themselves. And so that's a selecting process in this. I mean, who are they to make that decision? You know what I mean? So it's just it's a big baggage there that I just don't like. That's what I want to do. But putting that aside, almost everything else I'll accept. You know, I'll accept any other form as long as the artist comes out with an object that I can hang on the wall and look at and appreciate and throw out if I don't want and whatever. You know, it's a tangible thing. I had a young artist approach the gallery when we first opened, and he was a conceptual artist, and he'd heard that we had these movable walls in the gallery. These walls, we can roll them around. And I said, well, why did you come to the gallery? Because I was curious, because we just opened, it was a very short time. And he's like, I heard you've got movable walls and it's a big space. I said, oh, okay, that's good. So what's your idea? He goes, I've got this idea of lining up the walls facing each other this way. And I said, yeah, okay, so what's the... I was like, you know, I'm interested in the concept of the exhibition. He was I thought this guy's onto something. And, okay, so what do you want to do with these walls? I want to stretch some wires across the tops of each of these boxes. So I had this vision of these boxes lined up this way, and wires going over the top. And I'm thinking, okay, what's going to hang on the walls? What's going to hang on the walls? You know, I'm thinking. And what are you going to do? He took out his phone and he showed me his work. And there were tea towels hanging from these things. A bunch of tea towels. He wanted to hang 1,000 tea towels from the wires. And I said to him, that's all well and good. How am I going to sell it? How am I going to sell it? he said, well, you know, it's not all about selling, is it? You come to the wrong gallery to spend the money. Yes, it is about selling. I said, you can go to a council gallery and get some government sponsorship and they'll give you a space to hang your details in, but not here. Right? So that was my answer to them. So that type of thing, I know it's interesting, these ideas, they can be interesting. Don't get me wrong, the idea can be interesting. But unless there's an artifact attached to it, a tangible artifact, for me, I hate to use this expression, but it's not art. I know it sounds very close-minded, maybe I am, but it's just not. It's a good talking point, it's a discussion, it's a great essay you can write, it's a beautiful thing you can read about, but it's not. It's me, you know? I mean, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who disagree with it, but that's just the way I see it. So, yeah, that's one thing, that's one road I won't go down, but I thought why I said that. But anyway, that's all for me. Any final questions?
All right, well,
Thank you.
we'll close off.
Good.
Thank you, Elio, for
Pleasure.
sharing your psyche and sharing your practices with all of us. I think that it's wonderful that Elio has done exactly this. I'm very proud of Elio. Being my brother, I see him and I know him in a very different way. And I don't know of anyone who's more committed to what they are doing. And I think that's a wonderful, wonderful thing. And although sometimes he might come across as being single-minded, there's a wonderful sense of humility that I'm sure you would have discovered in what he said today. There's a profound sense of respect for people's own want and views and ideas. And I think that is a wonderful tool that an artist must keep in his or her own bag of tricks. Because painting is really not just about paint or brushes or frames.